The United States has given the East a golden opportunity to rise. As the era of hegemony comes to an end, there will always be someone pressing the accelerator. This person is the one who knows best. Anyone with a bit of common sense understands that to deal with enemies, one should play factions against each other. However, this person prioritized firing upon allies. First, high tariffs offended Canada and Mexico, setting fire to his own backyard. Then, he sent representatives to Europe to criticize allies, claiming they were taking advantage of the US. He stated that Europe's greatest threat comes from within, and imposed a 25% tariff on the EU. Now, he publicly mocks those countries begging for mercy, likening it to kissing a certain part of him. Such statements completely shut down diplomatic avenues. Most remarkably, in recent days, the White House reiterated the idea of making Canada the 51st state. Isn't this laying the groundwork for the East to reclaim lost territory? If the US is expanding its territory, isn't it reasonable for the East to reclaim lost ground? This person has nearly pushed all allies to opposition. As the saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Is there a better time for retaliation than now? No. Heaven's opportunities should not be wasted. This opportunity must be seized. There is no possibility for compromise between the East and the US. During the 2008 financial crisis, the East responded to the US by purchasing vast amounts of treasury bonds. They invested $4 trillion to stabilize the market, trading years of inflation for the US's rebirth. This made the US realize the threat from the East. With such a large market, the East can absorb anything the US produces. Yet they claim they are not militarily capable. Thus, in 2012, the US proposed a pivot to Asia to contain the still-growing East. Then in 2018, after negotiations with the East, the US reversed and imposed new tariffs. After signing the first phase of the trade agreement in 2019, the US maintained a 7.5% tariff and continued technology restrictions. As the saying goes, once bitten by a snake, one is afraid of a rope for 10 years. The East has been bitten by the US twice. Will there be a third chance to be bitten again? Initially, Yeltsin surrendered to the West, and the Soviet Union collapsed. Russia's economy has stagnated, leaving it with outdated military equipment. Now, they are not seeking a deal. They just lack the confidence for a decisive battle. The sixth-generation aircraft has only just emerged, lacking true combat capability. When they are ready to ensure victory in the first battle, the era of US hegemony will end. Many believe that the US is the East's main partner, and the East is merely a subordinate. This idea that subordinates must accommodate their superiors is absurd. During the Opium War, the US was the biggest benefactor of British opium. Did Britain accommodate the US? Not at all. They opened the Qing dynasty's doors, while shouting for free trade, while flooding the market with opium. Therefore, the world ultimately speaks with strength. The US manufacturing sector is nearly hollowed out. They can't even produce a simple toilet. What can they do besides printing dollars and waging wars? They claim they want to revive manufacturing, yet they lack places to build factories. Young Americans are not inclined to work in factories. In 2017, their exports totaled $2.1 trillion. By 2024, it increased to $3.57 trillion. Direct exports to the US rose from $430 billion in 2017 to over $520 billion in 2024. This shows that the 6-year trade war did not bring manufacturing back to the US. The US has not rebuilt its productive capacity, nor attracted production from the East to other countries. Meanwhile, the East has expanded domestic demand and successfully diversified its export focus through the Belt and Road Initiative. 6 years ago, when they lacked sixth-generation fighters, the US could not achieve what the East has accomplished now. Otherwise, these sixth-generation fighters would be in vain. The East possesses the most complete and powerful manufacturing system globally. from raw materials and components to finished products, forming an unshakable industrial cluster. Is it possible for the US to completely decouple? Take electronics, for example. The US reliance on the East is astonishing. 86% for gaming consoles, 79% for computer screens, 76% for toys, 73% for smartphones, 70% for lithium batteries, 66% for laptops. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Can Vietnam or India replace the East? Vietnam has a population of only 100 million, with a GDP just a fraction of the East's. India, though populous, has infrastructure decades behind. They can't even provide basic living standards. Thus, the U.S. Department of Defense reports that the latest Ford-class aircraft carrier operations it relies on over 6,500 semiconductors made by Dongda. In 2023, the trade deficit with Dongda in the US is nearly $300 billion. The president has imposed a 245% tariff. This can only lead to one result. That is, US prices will rise directly by 245%. All American citizens will pay the price. Currently, egg prices in the US have skyrocketed. In the future, rent, vegetables, and beef will also soar in price. Moreover, after the tariff was imposed, the U.S. customs system mysteriously failed to accept the tariffs. Is this really just a coincidence? It doesn't seem so. It's likely that there's internal resistance to the president's foolish policies. Now he has to soften his stance, frequently urging Dongda to call him. Why? Because he knows the US cannot do without Dongda's products. He fears that inflation caused by tariffs will ruin his midterm elections. It's evident who benefits from this situation. At this stage, Dongda's manufacturing is irreplaceable. Thus, the US cannot do without Dongda. This is the confidence behind our resolve. The biggest advantage for the US is finance. At the end of the day, it's just a matter of printing dollars. The US is essentially a dollar printing factory. Once dollars are printed, they need to be exchanged for Dongda products. For example, if Dongda has 100 items, 50 of those are exchanged for US printed paper. This is how foreign exchange was earned early on. However, a problem arises. As Dongda accumulates more IOUs, it finds that, apart from oil, there's little else to obtain. When the US wanted to acquire Ukraine's Motor Sich, the US blocked the acquisition. When they wanted to buy some optical equipment and chips, the US prevented the purchase. In the end, when they sought to buy farms or mines, the US also denied those requests. The goal of the US is to make Dongda buy US Treasury bonds. This is essentially money printed by the US in exchange for goods from Dongda, and then they return the money to the US. At this point, the issue should be clear. Round and round. The money stays with the US. The goods are also with the US. Dongda hardly gains anything. Right? This is why Dongda's trade surplus with the US keeps growing. In fact, it is Dongda that suffers. Real goods are sent abroad, but they receive an IOU in dollars. This IOU not only depreciates due to the dollar's overissuance, but they also must issue an equivalent amount of currency at home. For instance, if they exchanged $100, they need to issue 700 yuan domestically. However, the problem arises. Their goods have already gone to the US. If they issue an additional 700 yuan but lack the goods, it will cause inflation. Therefore, to maintain price stability, the central bank must withdraw some yuan from the market. This compresses the funding supply in other domestic sectors. It leads to service industries, such as catering, being forced into a downward spiral. Do you see? This is how the downward spiral begins. The best way to break this cycle is for them to print money while Dongda ensures stability. Currently, the main reason for weak domestic demand is the lack of funds. If the central bank directly buys treasury bonds, the problem would be resolved. How did the US thrive? It relied on others using foreign exchange to buy treasury bonds. Then the US used that money to provide welfare. Then Americans used that money to buy Dongda's products. Currently, Dongda's CPI is still negative at 0%. This shows there is still room to issue currency without causing inflation. The $300 billion trade surplus with the US annually means over 2 trillion yuan subsidizing Americans. If this money were used to develop the domestic economy, how much would the people's lives improve? So the truth is that without the US, Dongda would fare better. This is the best opportunity to expand domestic demand. Moreover, the president's series of policies, such as imposing tariffs, threatening allies, and withdrawing from international organizations, are actually accelerating the decline of US hegemony. Recently, more and more countries are starting to use the yuan for international trade, reducing reliance on the dollar. Countries like Argentina are trying to bypass the dollar in transactions. This indicates that US hegemony is beginning to wane. As for America's allies, they are now openly defying the US. For example, Japan and the UK have rejected concessions to the US. European nations are also frustrated but silent. If someone stands up, it would be greatly welcomed. If the sky falls, there's someone tall to hold it up. And this tall person is quite capable. What if they actually break through? On the other hand, the president finds it difficult to mobilize all of his strength domestically. At least half of Americans are waiting to see him fail. The Democrats are preparing to sue him, claiming he has violated the International Emergency Economic Powers Act by imposing tariffs. This is an overreach. The president's house is already on fire. It's uncertain how many fires he can put out. Moreover, capitalists are fundamentally opposed to tariff wars. His own interests are harmed. There are hardly any who truly wish to return home. Basically none. During the late Ming period, the Manchu were already advancing. In Jiangnan, they were still pleading poverty to the Ming court, claiming they had no money. So now, facing internal and external troubles in America. This is a God-given opportunity for the rise of the East. If he likes this video, he should like and follow. Then he can watch the update first.